I was deep in third quarter reconciliation when my laptop pinged with an incoming video call. Harper Home blinked across the screen like a warning light. I hesitated, then clicked accept. My mother's face filled the frame, practically glowing. "Miranda, sweetheart, we have the most wonderful news," she trilled. That voice, that tone, it always meant I was about to lose something. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my pen against the desk. "What's going on?" Dad appeared beside her, grinning like a man who just won the lottery. "You know how Ellie's been stressing over the wedding? It's all fixed now." "Oh," I said carefully. Mom clasped her hands together. "We sold your cabin." The room tilted. "You what?" "Your cabin?" she repeated like I hadn't heard her. "We got an amazing offer above asking, and it's perfect. We wired the deposit for the venue this morning. Isn't that incredible?" I didn't move. I couldn't. That cabin wasn't just property. It was privacy. It was peace. It was mine.
"You weren't even using it," Dad added. "It's been sitting empty for years." "I've been working, Dad, in Seattle, not on vacation." "Exactly," Mom chirped. "So why let a whole cabin go to waste? Ellie deserves a beautiful wedding, and this way she gets everything she's dreamed of. It's your gift to her." I felt something in my chest tighten and lock. "That's wonderful," I managed. Mom clapped. "I knew you'd understand. You've always been so generous." "Ellie's going to be thrilled," Dad added. "She already is. Mom said she picked out her dress yesterday. Wait until you see it. It's hand-stitched silk from Italy." They kept talking, smiling like we were planning a vacation and not dissecting my life. I watched their faces full of celebration, utterly oblivious. "Anyway," Mom said, adjusting the camera, "we just wanted to share the good news. Love you, sweetheart." "Love you," I replied with practiced calm and clicked to end the call. The silence that followed was louder than anything they'd said. I closed my laptop and reached for my phone. There was only one person I needed to call. I bought the cabin when I was 28, alone. No cosigner, no congratulations from home. Just me, a real estate lawyer, and a banker who called me ma'am in the email chain. It sat on a quiet patch of Lake Washington with a wide porch and a dock that jutted out like a stubborn jaw. I furnished it slowly. Secondhand books, a worn armchair, hand-woven blankets from a Montana artisan who never remembered my name. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. The one space untouched by guilt, expectation, or performance. I didn't even tell my family until 6 months later, and when I did, my mother barely looked up from her crossword. "Must be nice," she'd said. That was the first month I started sending money home. It was subtle at first. $300 here, a credit card payment there, Ellie's tuition bill, the water heater, Dad's car lease. By the second year, it was automatic, scheduled, sanitized through shell accounts and online transfers. I never mentioned it. They never asked where it came from. It was easier that way for them. At some point, I stopped counting. I stopped visiting the cabin too. It hurt less to imagine it pristine and untouched than to return and find it filled with other people's needs. But one thing I hadn't forgotten, couldn't forget, was what I'd done 18 months after closing. I moved the deed under a holding company I set up during grad school, Hartmont Holdings. It was dormant until I gave it a purpose. No one else knew, not even Rachel. I didn't do it because I expected them to steal from me. I did it because deep down, I knew they might. I pulled out my laptop and opened the encrypted drive. Everything was there. The original deed, the transfer paperwork, the tax filings, a quiet insurance policy hidden in plain sight. Then I called Rachel. Rachel picked up on the second ring.
Amanda?
"Wow, it's been a minute. I need a favor." I said, "Something legal. Something big." She didn't miss a beat. "I'm listening. I think my parents just sold a cabin they didn't own." There was a pause. "Come again?" I explained everything. How they'd called that morning, beaming like they'd won the lottery, proudly announcing they'd sold my cabin to pay for Ellie's wedding. How they talked about it like I should be proud. And here's the thing, I added, opening the PDF on my screen. They didn't sell my cabin. They sold a property belonging to Hartmont Holdings. Your holding company, Rachel, said, voice tightening. The one we created together. Exactly. I moved the deed years ago. I just checked it's still under Hartmont. They forged my signature on the sale documents. Jesus, Miranda. They always knew where the key was, where the paperwork was. I gave them too much trust. You gave them everything, she corrected. And they used it to commit felony fraud. I exhaled slowly. That word makes it real. It is real. And if they cash that check, it's also traceable. I minimized the deed files and sat back in my chair. Do I have a case? Rachel laughed bitterly. You don't just have a case, you have a nuclear bomb. Forgery, misrepresentation, theft of corporate assets. This isn't just a family squabble, Miranda. It's criminal. I stared at the screen, at my parents' smiling faces frozen in the call thumbnail. They thought they'd gotten away with something. They thought I'd nod, send a gift, maybe offer to cover the band. I've been sending them money for years, I said quietly. Mortgage, credit cards, Ellie's loans. I didn't want recognition. I just didn't want them to drown. Rachel's tone softened. And they turned around and dragged you under anyway. I should have cut them off. You tried. You bought yourself an island. They just paddled out after you. I didn't respond. I was already drafting the paperwork. My hand didn't shake. Not this time. Let me guess, Rachel said. You're not calling to vent. No, I said I'm calling to fight. The template was already in Rachel's files. We modified it, swapped names, dates, property ID, then ran it through Hartmont's counsel for formal review. Within 48 hours, a foreclosure notice was prepped, notarized, and sent to my parents' front door via certified mail. No threats, no explanations, just the facts. The sale was unauthorized, the buyer defrauded, and all proceeds frozen pending legal investigation. Hartmont Holdings was asserting its rights. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even call. Instead, I opened our old family group chat, the one muted for over a year, and sent a single message. Check your mail. That was it. Then I closed the app, shut my laptop, and made tea. I waited in the stillness of my apartment. The only noise, the clink of the spoon against porcelain. The silence was sharp, but not empty. They'd wanted me quiet, obedient, the background figure who kept the lights on. So I gave them what they asked for. A version of quiet they wouldn't know how to handle. By morning, 3 messages blinked across my screen. One from Mom. Honey, did something happen? The mailman dropped off something confusing. One from Dad. We should talk, Miranda. And one from Ellie. This is about your stupid cabin, isn't it? I didn't answer. I forwarded them all to Rachel. She replied 2 minutes later. They're rattled. Good. I put my phone face down on the table and looked out at the gray Seattle skyline. I hadn't won yet, but something had shifted. For once, I wasn't the one waiting to be forgiven. I wasn't the one cleaning up someone else's mess. This time, they were going to feel what it was like to stand in a storm they couldn't see coming. The first email from Lauren landed at 6:42 a.m. Subject: urgent payment issues, Mitchell wedding. She was polite at first, almost apologetic. Hi, Miranda. I'm following up regarding several bounced payments connected to the upcoming event. The venue has requested immediate confirmation, and the florist is asking for a new deposit. Can someone from your family give me a call? I didn't reply. By noon, there were 5 more. The tone shifted. Desperation bled through the sentences. The band is demanding cash up front. The Grand Vista says they're releasing your date if they don't hear back in 48 hours. Please advise ASAP. I screenshotted each message and forwarded them to Rachel. She responded with a single thumbs up. Meanwhile, Ellie was posting bridal selfies like nothing was wrong. Her Instagram was a wedding countdown in soft pastels, lace robes, manicured hands, champagne flutes balanced on pedicured toes, final fitting before the big day, can't wait to marry my prince, blessed and glowing. The comments were full of heart emojis and goals. None of her followers knew the checks were bouncing or that the string quartet hadn't confirmed. The illusion held for now, but I could see the cracks forming. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine and read the latest from Lauren. This one was marked urgent. Response required. Hi, Miranda. I've now received warnings from 7 vendors about pending cancellations. I've tried contacting your parents but haven't heard back. I need to know what's going on. Please, my name is on some of these contracts. My reputation is at risk. Still, I said nothing. They built this fantasy on money they didn't own, on a cabin that wasn't theirs, and on the belief that I'd stay silent forever. But silence doesn't mean surrender. I poured another glass and opened the file Rachel had sent the official injunction paperwork, prepped for filing in the morning. This was no longer a warning. It was the beginning of the collapse. By 9:15 a.m., Rachel had filed the injunction. The court clerk confirmed receipt. The judge assigned to our case had a reputation for efficiency, and within hours, a temporary restraining order was issued. The sale was frozen, all funds flagged for fraud investigation. Hartmont Holdings' legal standing was now official. My parents hadn't just sold a cabin, they'd tried to launder stolen property through a closed loop of entitlement and assumption. I didn't need to announce it. The avalanche started on its own. By late afternoon, my phone began to buzz. The family group chat, silent for months, lit up like a flare. Mom, honey, there's some issue with the bank. Can you check Dad, Miranda? We're getting strange calls from the title company. Ellie, what did you do? I didn't reply. Then came the phone calls, 10 missed calls in under 30 minutes. I muted the thread and set my phone face down on the counter. Let them spiral, let them guess. I opened my laptop to an email from the escrow officer CCing my attorney. All disbursements have been placed on hold pending legal review. Another message followed minutes later from the buyer's real estate agent. Please contact us immediately to clarify the ownership structure. Our client is extremely concerned. I took a long sip of coffee and refreshed Lauren's inbox. A new subject line had appeared. Help. I'm losing control of the wedding. She had no idea just how much worse it was about to get. I didn't enjoy watching things fall apart, not in the way Ellie would have had it been reversed, but there was a quiet, brutal satisfaction in letting cause meet effect. They'd acted without asking, without checking, without once considering that I might not just lie down and take it. Now the money was locked, the timeline was wrecked, and every call they made bounced off the same wall. My silence. I closed every tab but one, the live status of the restraining order. Active, it read. Rachel texted, they're going to feel this by morning. I didn't answer. I just watched. The call came just after midnight. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. A part of me wanted to hear how far they'd fallen. Miranda. My mother's voice was almost unrecognizable. Sweetheart, please don't hang up. I didn't say anything. Dad's voice came next, brittle but still trying for calm. We just need to talk. There's been some confusion, something with the bank. You mean the fraud investigation? I said that, confusion. A silence stretched. Miranda, we didn't know, Mom whispered. We thought... You thought what? My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That the cabin was just sitting there waiting for you to sell, that you were entitled to something you never earned. We needed the money, she said almost childlike. Ellie's wedding. You've had money, I cut in. What? I'm $800 a month for 4 years. Paid your mortgage, covered your credit cards, car payments, half of Ellie's tuition. More silence. I thought it was from a relative. Dad murmured. It was, I said, the one you raised. The one you taught to be useful, not loved. Mom started crying. Loud, hiccuping sobs. "We didn't know it was you." "No, you didn't want to know because if you knew, you'd have to feel guilty about how easy it was to take. We were just trying to keep things afloat," Dad said. "You're doing so well, and that's why you thought I wouldn't notice when you stole from me." "Don't say that," Mom cried. "We are family." "No," I said softly. "You didn't raise a daughter. You raised a safety net." There was no yelling on the other end, no excuses left. "I was your guardian angel," I said, "and you stole from her." I hung up, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing else left to say. My phone lit up again seconds later. I powered it off and sat in the dark. The only sound in the room, my own breath. They weren't calling to make it right. They were calling because they finally realized what it meant to lose me. The headline hit the local news 2 days before the hearing. Bride's family accused of real estate fraud to fund $120,000 wedding. I didn't leak it, but I didn't stop it either. Lauren, the planner, gave a statement to the press, tearful, angry, said she'd been misled, that she was left with thousands in vendor losses and a ruined reputation. The comments were brutal. The sympathy wasn't with Ellie. In court, the prosecutor laid out everything: the forged signatures, the illegal sale, the financial trail tracing back to Hartmont Holdings. They called me to the stand first. I spoke plainly. No tears, no vengeance, just numbers, timelines, and receipts. My parents sat at the defense table, stiff and pale. Their lawyer didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. Then Ellie took the stand. She lasted 3 minutes before unraveling. "She's jealous," she shouted, pointing at me. "She's always been jealous. She couldn't stand that it was my turn to be happy." "Miss Harper," the judge warned, "she doesn't want a family. She just wants to ruin everything." Security was already moving before the judge gave the order. They escorted her out as she kicked over her chair. The room was silent again. The judge turned to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Harper, you didn't just violate the law. You violated trust. You didn't ask. You didn't warn. You forged your daughter's name and treated her property like a family ATM." Mom's lip trembled. Dad just stared at the floor. "When you forged her name," the judge said coldly, "you forfeited the right to call yourself her family." The gavel came down. Charges were filed. Sentencing would follow. Outside, cameras waited. I said nothing. Just kept walking past reporters, past flashbulbs, past the courthouse steps. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt finished. The cabin looked exactly the same. Same chipped white shutters, same creaky porch step, same wind chimes my mother once bought on a roadside trip and forgot about the next day. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. I walked through each room slowly. The furniture was just as I'd left it, intact, untouched, but something in the air had shifted. It smelled like memory, not home. Every corner held a ghost of something that used to comfort me. Now it just reminded me how easily comfort can be turned against you. I paused by the bookshelf, fingers tracing the spine of a novel I'd reread during one long winter break. I used to dream in this cabin, plan futures, breathe freely. Then I thought about the call, the one where they told me it was gone, like it had never mattered. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out over the lake, still as glass. It had been my sanctuary, my proof that I could build something without them. Now it was just a box full of someone else's assumptions. I stood, pulled the key ring from my pocket, and walked back to the kitchen. There was no dramatic gesture, no slam. I simply placed the keys on the counter. A quiet exit from a place that no longer needed me, and that I no longer needed. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. Back in Seattle, I sat on the floor of my apartment and opened my contacts. One by one, I deleted them. Mom, Dad, Ellie, every cousin who sent guilt-laced messages about keeping the family together. It didn't sting. It felt like cleaning. Then I opened a new account at a small credit union no one in my past had access to. No joint permissions, no auto transfers, just mine. When the call came, I almost let it go to voicemail. But I answered. "This is Detective Lane?" the voice said. "I thought you'd want to know your case is leading to others. We've had 3 more adult children report financial abuse since your hearing. They saw your story." For a moment, I didn't speak. Then I said, "Good."
Sometimes it takes one person being willing to burn the whole thing down. I didn't burn it, I said they did. I just stopped shielding them from the smoke. He paused, then hung up. I stared at the screen a little longer, then shut it off. That night, I packed a small bag. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No one needed to know. The only destination that mattered was somewhere they couldn't follow. At sunrise, I boarded a train headed north. I didn't have an address, just an idea. The trees blurred past the window, and for the first time in years, I wasn't calculating anyone else's needs. I wasn't checking my balance to cover someone else's mistake. The phone in my lap didn't buzz once. No one knew where I was. No one expected anything. And for the first time in my life, that silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like freedom.
Miranda learns the profound cost of enabling her family's entitlement and the power of reclaiming her boundaries.
By quietly supporting their needs, sending money, sacrificing her own peace, she inadvertently allowed them to exploit her, culminating in the unauthorized sale of her cabin. Her response, a calculated legal fight, teaches her that silence isn't surrender. It's a weapon when wielded with purpose. Cutting ties and walking away, she discovers that true freedom comes from shedding the weight of others' expectations. Her lesson is clear. Self-preservation demands courage to let go, even when it means dismantling the illusion of family.
The community center looked exactly like what it was. A simple room with folding chairs, basic decorations, and borrowed flowers from the grocery store down the street. But to me it was perfect. "I can't believe she's doing this to us," Dad muttered to Mom as they took their seats in the front row. His voice carried more than he probably intended, and several guests turned to look. "A community center wedding? What will people think?" Mom nodded along, adjusting her dress uncomfortably. "I told her we'd pay for a proper venue. The country club or at least the hotel downtown. But no, she insisted on this place." My fiancé Michael squeezed my hand as we watched from the small side room where I was getting ready. Through the crack in the door we could see the entire wedding party, all 43 guests, settling into their seats. "Are you sure you don't want to tell them?" Michael asked quietly. "About your real job, I mean. About everything." I shook my head, adjusting my simple white dress in the mirror. "They made their choice 5 years ago when they cut me off for embarrassing the family. They said I was throwing my life away, remember? But look at what you've accomplished." "They don't want to look," I interrupted gently. "They want me to be ashamed of my choices so they can feel superior about theirs." Through the door I could hear my brother Kevin talking to his wife Sandra. "I still can't believe she invited us after all this time. I mean, what's she trying to prove with this budget wedding?" "Maybe she's finally ready to admit she made a mistake," Sandra replied. "Maybe she wants to come back to the family business now that she's seen how the real world works." I almost laughed. If only they knew how the real world had actually worked out for me. 5 years ago, when I'd graduated from college with a degree in social work, my family had been horrified. Dad owned 3 successful insurance agencies, Kevin was a lawyer, and my sister Amanda was a corporate executive. They couldn't understand why I'd want to work with troubled kids for practically nothing, when I could have joined the family business and made real money. "You're wasting your education," Dad had said. "You're embarrassing this family." When I'd taken a job at a residential facility for at-risk youth instead of the sales position Dad had arranged for me at his company, they'd stopped speaking to me entirely. "Sarah's going through a phase," I'd heard Mom tell her friends. "She'll come back when she realizes that helping people doesn't pay the bills." But I hadn't come back. Instead, I'd thrown myself into my work, spending 12-hour days with kids who'd been written off by everyone else. I'd worked nights and weekends to earn additional certifications. I'd taken on extra training, attended conferences, and slowly built a reputation as someone who could reach the most difficult cases. And somewhere along the way I'd caught the attention of some very important people. "Sarah," Michael said, looking out at the guests, "your dad just said something about being surprised you could even afford a wedding cake." I sighed. He's probably wondering how I'm paying for any of this on a social worker's salary. The truth was, I wasn't paying for it on a social worker's salary. Because while my family had been dismissing my career choice, that career had taken some unexpected turns. 2 years ago, the governor had been looking for someone to head a new statewide initiative on youth rehabilitation. Someone with extensive field experience, advanced certifications, and a proven track record of success with difficult cases. Someone who understood both the academic theory and the street-level reality of working with at-risk youth. My name had come up in every conversation. The appointment had come with a significant salary increase, a staff of 40, and direct access to state and federal funding for innovative programs. Within 18 months, our initiative had reduced youth recidivism by 37% statewide. The success had caught national attention. 6 months ago, I'd been invited to Washington to consult on federal policy. 3 months ago, I'd been asked to join a presidential task force on juvenile justice reform. Last month, the president had personally called to thank me for my work and to invite me to speak at a national conference. But my family didn't know any of this, because they'd never bothered to ask about my work beyond their initial disapproval. Ladies and gentlemen, the small quartet we'd hired began playing the processional music. It was time. Michael kissed my cheek and went out to take his place at the altar. My matron of honor, Lisa, squeezed my hand. "You ready for this?" she asked. I looked out at the simple community center, at the folding chairs and grocery store flowers, at my family sitting in the front row looking vaguely embarrassed to be there. "I'm ready," I said. But as I stepped toward the door, my phone buzzed with a text message. I almost ignored it. Who texts someone during their wedding? But something made me look. It was from Governor Patricia Williams. "Sarah, I am so sorry I'm running late. Air Force One was delayed and we're just landing now. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't start without me. Patricia." I stared at the message, my heart starting to race. Governor Williams had said she'd try to make it if her schedule allowed, but I hadn't really expected her to show up. She was, after all, one of the busiest people in the state. But we'd developed a close working relationship over the past 2 years. She'd become not just my boss but a mentor and friend. When I'd mentioned that my father wouldn't be walking me down the aisle, he'd refused, saying he was too embarrassed by this whole spectacle. She'd offered to step in. "Patricia Williams wants to walk me down the aisle?" I'd asked, incredulous. "Sarah, you've become like a daughter to me," she'd said. "You've revolutionized youth services in this state. You've saved lives. If your family can't see what an remarkable woman you are, then I'd be honored to stand in their place." I'd assumed she was just being kind. I never imagined she'd actually show up. "Sarah." Lisa was looking at me strangely. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "The governor is coming," I whispered. "What governor?" "Governor Williams. She's going to walk me down the aisle." Lisa's eyes widened. "The governor of the entire state? That Governor Williams?" Before I could answer, we heard a commotion outside. Car doors slamming, official voices, the distinctive sound of a security detail mobilizing. Through the window I could see 3 black SUVs pulling up to the community center. Men in dark suits were getting out, speaking into earpieces, scanning the area with professional alertness. Inside the wedding venue, the quiet conversations had stopped entirely. I could hear confused murmurs, people asking each other what was happening. "Sarah," Dad's voice carried from the main room, "what's going on out there?" I smoothed my dress and checked my reflection one last time. "I guess we're about to find out." The front doors of the community center opened and Governor Patricia Williams walked in, flanked by 2 security agents. She was wearing an elegant navy blue suit and a warm smile, and she commanded the room instantly. "Sorry I'm late, kiddo," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Air Force One was delayed and then the motorcade hit traffic. The silence in the room was absolute. Every single person, my family, Michael's family, our friends, was staring at the governor of our state as she walked directly toward me. Dad's mouth was literally hanging open. Mom looked like she was about to faint. Kevin had dropped his wedding program on the floor. "Governor Williams," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "thank you so much for coming." He pulled me into a warm hug. I wouldn't miss this for anything. You know how proud I am of you. Proud. Dad's voice cracked as he said the word. The governor turned toward my family with a polite but slightly cool smile. You must be Sarah's parents. I'm Patricia Williams. The governor, Mom stammered. That's right. I've had the privilege of working closely with your daughter for the past 2 years. She's one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Working with Sarah? But she's just a social worker at some group home. Governor Williams raised an eyebrow. Sarah is the director of statewide youth rehabilitation initiatives. She reports directly to me. Her programs have revolutionized how we handle juvenile justice in this state. Director. Kevin's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah's work has been so successful that the president asked her to join a federal task force on juvenile justice reform, the governor continued. She's been consulting with the White House for the past 6 months. The looks on my family's faces were shifting from confusion to dawning realization to something that looked like shock. The White House. Amanda, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Sarah works with the White House? Works with them, advises them, speaks at their conferences, Governor Williams confirmed. Last month, the president personally called to thank Sarah for her contribution to federal policy development. I watched my father's face go through what looked like every emotion at once. Confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally something that might have been pride. But, Mom said weakly, she never told us about any of this. Governor Williams looked at my parents with an expression that was polite but unmistakably pointed. Perhaps she would have, if you'd shown interest in her work instead of dismissing it. The silence that followed was deafening. Now then, the governor said, turning back to me with a bright smile, are you ready to get married? I believe I have a very important job to do. She offered me her arm, and together we walked toward the doors that led into the main ceremony space. Behind us, I could hear my family whispering frantically to each other, trying to process what they'd just learned. Sarah, Dad called out as we reached the doors. Sarah, wait. I turned back to look at him. For the first time in 5 years, he was looking at me like he actually saw me. He started, then stopped. I had no idea. I know, I said quietly. I tried to tell you, but you didn't want to hear about my little social work job. The processional music started again and the doors opened. Every guest in the community center turned to watch as Governor Patricia Williams escorted me down the aisle. As we walked, I could hear whispered conversations throughout the room. Is that really the governor? She said Sarah works for the White House? I can't believe Sarah never mentioned. The president called her personally? When we reached the altar, Governor Williams hugged me again and whispered in my ear, "You've built something beautiful, Sarah. Don't let anyone make you feel small for the choices you've made." She took her seat in the front row, right next to my parents, who were staring at her like she was a mythical creature who had materialized in their community center. The ceremony proceeded, but I could tell that half the guests were still processing what they'd witnessed. My family kept glancing between me and the governor like they were trying to solve a puzzle. When Michael and I exchanged vows, I promised to continue building a life based on service and compassion. He promised to support my work, even when it meant late nights and difficult cases and criticism from people who didn't understand. As we kissed and the crowd applauded, I caught sight of my family in the front row. Dad was clapping, but his eyes were filled with tears. Mom looked stunned but was trying to smile. Kevin and Amanda were whispering to each other, probably comparing notes about everything they'd missed over the past 5 years. At the reception, held in the same community center with catered food from a local family restaurant, Governor Williams gave an impromptu speech. "I've known many dedicated public servants in my career," she said, raising her glass of sparkling cider, "but I've rarely met anyone with Sarah's combination of expertise, compassion, and results. She's transformed how we approach youth rehabilitation, and her work has literally saved hundreds of lives." The room erupted in applause. My family clapped too, but I could see they were still processing everything. After the governor left, with another security detail and another motorcade, my family approached me at the head table. "Sarah," Dad said, sitting down heavily in the chair next to me, "I owe you an apology." "Several apologies," Mom added quietly. "We had no idea," Amanda said. "When you said you were working in social services, we thought. You thought I was wasting my life," I finished for her. You thought I was throwing away my education and embarrassing the family. Yes, Dad admitted. And we were wrong. We were so wrong. Kevin pulled up a chair. Sarah, why didn't you tell us? About the promotion, about working with the governor, about the White House. I looked around at my family. These people who had dismissed my choices, cut me off, and refused to attend family gatherings for 5 years because they were ashamed of my career. When would I have told you? I asked gently. You stopped taking my calls 3 years ago. You didn't invite me to Christmas or Kevin's promotion party or Amanda's housewarming. You made it clear that you didn't want to hear about my work unless I was ready to admit it was a mistake. The truth of what I was saying hit them like a physical blow. Every time I tried to explain what I was doing, I continued, you interrupted to tell me I was wasting my potential. Every time I tried to share something I was proud of, you changed the subject to when I was going to get a real job. We thought we were helping, Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes. We thought we were motivating you to aim higher. I did aim higher, I said. I aimed so high that the President of the United States knows my name. I just aimed in a direction you didn't understand. Dad reached over and took my hand. Sarah, can you ever forgive us? I looked at this man who had raised me, who had once been proud of my accomplishments, who had let his own narrow definition of success blind him to what I was actually achieving. Dad, I never stopped loving you, I said. Any of you. I just needed you to respect my choices, even if you didn't understand them. We want to understand now, Amanda said. Will you tell us about your work? Really tell us. So I did. I told them about the residential facility where I'd started, about the kids who'd been written off by everyone else, about the programs I'd developed and the lives that had changed. I told them about the research I'd published, the conferences where I'd spoken, the policies I'd helped shape. I told them about Marcus, a 15-year-old gang member who was now studying pre-med in college. About Jennifer, who'd aged out of foster care and was now running her own nonprofit. About David, who'd been arrested 12 times before age 16 and was now working as a counselor for other at-risk youth. You've been doing all of this, Kevin said, while we were telling you to get a real job. I had a real job, I said. I had the most real job imaginable. I was helping kids who had nowhere else to turn. And now you're helping kids all across the state, Mom said, finally beginning to understand. And influencing national policy. The community center, Dad said suddenly, looking around at our wedding venue with new eyes. You chose this place on purpose, didn't you? I nodded. This is where it all started. 5 years ago, this community center ran an after-school program for kids in the neighborhood. I volunteered here on weekends when I was working at the residential facility. Some of the kids I met here were my first success stories. And now it's the headquarters for one of our most successful community outreach programs. We serve over 300 kids a week here. Dad looked around the room, at the simple folding chairs, at the borrowed decorations, at the kids' artwork hanging on the walls, with completely new understanding. This isn't a cheap venue, he said quietly. This is your life's work. This is where I fell in love with the work, I corrected, and where I realized that success isn't measured by how impressive your office is, but by how many lives you can touch. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, my family lingered. For the first time in 5 years, none of us seemed eager to end the conversation. Sarah, Mom said, would you be willing to have dinner with us next week? Really have dinner where we listen to you talk about your work. I'd like that, I said. And maybe, Dad added hesitantly, you could show us the programs you run? Help us understand what you've built. I smiled at him. I'd love to. As Michael and I packed up the remaining wedding decorations, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I'd been a recent college graduate with a passion for helping kids and a family who thought I was throwing my life away. Today I was a respected expert in my field, married to a man who supported my work, and finally reconnecting with a family who was beginning to understand that there are many different ways to measure success. So, Michael said, carefully folding up the table linens we'd borrowed from the community center, how does it feel to have the governor of the state walk you down the aisle? I laughed. It feels like the perfect ending to the perfect wedding. Even though your dad spent the first half hour complaining about the venue? Especially because of that, I said. He needed to learn that the most important things in life usually don't look impressive from the outside. As we turned off the lights and locked up the community center, The same community center where I'd discovered my calling, where I'd built my first programs, where I'd gotten married, and where tomorrow I'd be back to work helping kids build better futures. I realized that everything had worked out exactly as it should have. My family had needed to see me succeed on my own terms before they could respect the terms I'd chosen. And I'd needed to prove to myself that my work mattered regardless of whether they understood it. Now finally we could build something new together. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than disappointed expectations. A family that celebrated different kinds of success instead of only recognizing one narrow definition of achievement. It had taken 5 years, a governor's intervention, and a wedding in a community center to get us here. But we'd made it. The pastel pink and blue decorations hung from every corner of my sister Emma's living room, and the sound of laughter filled the air as 30 women gathered around tables laden with tiny sandwiches and cupcakes. I sat quietly in the corner, wearing my usual modest jeans and simple sweater, watching Emma open gift after expensive gift for her first baby. "Oh my God, Sarah, look at this," Emma squealed, holding up a $400 designer baby carrier. "From Aunt Patricia. Isn't it gorgeous?" I smiled and nodded, genuinely happy for her. Emma had always been the golden child of our family. Married to a successful lawyer, living in a beautiful suburban home, everything planned and perfect. Meanwhile, I was the family disappointment who still lived in a tiny studio apartment and worked odd hours on what everyone called my computer hobby. Mom beamed as she watched Emma unwrap each gift. Then her eyes landed on the small wrapped box I'd placed on the gift table earlier. It was simple brown paper, no fancy bow or elaborate card. "That tiny thing?" Mom whispered loudly to Aunt Patricia, not bothering to lower her voice. "Sarah probably got it at the dollar store. You know how she is with money." A few of the other women glanced over at me with those pitying looks I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Poor Sarah, the struggling sister who could barely afford rent, let alone proper baby gifts. Emma finally reached my gift and picked it up, weighing it in her hands. "This is light," she said with a forced smile. "Wonder what it could be." She tore off the paper to reveal a small jewelry box. Inside was a simple silver key on a delicate chain. "A key." Emma held it up, looking confused. "What's it for?" The room fell into an awkward silence. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes on me, waiting for an explanation that would probably disappoint them further. "It's symbolic," I said quietly. "For new beginnings." Mom let out an audible sigh. "Sarah, honey, this is a baby shower. People give actual baby things. Clothes, toys, useful items. Not whatever this is supposed to represent." "I think it's sweet," Emma said quickly, though I could tell she was embarrassed. "Very thoughtful." "Thoughtful doesn't pay for diapers," Mom muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few women chuckled uncomfortably. That's when Mom decided to really drive the point home. She stood up from her chair, wine glass in hand, and addressed the room like she was giving a toast. "Ladies, I have to apologize for my daughter Sarah," she began, gesturing toward me with her glass. "She means well, but she's been going through a bit of a rough patch lately. Financial troubles, you understand. Living in that tiny apartment, working on her little computer projects that never seemed to amount to anything." My face burned with humiliation as every woman in the room turned to stare at me. Some looked sympathetic, others just curious about the family drama unfolding. "Mom, please," I said quietly, but she was just getting started. "I keep telling her to get a real job, but she insists on chasing these pipe dreams. Building websites, she says. As if that's a real career." Mom laughed, and a few of the other women joined in. "The poor thing is barely scraping by. I honestly don't know how she even affords groceries some weeks." Emma looked mortified. "Mom, stop. This isn't." No, it's fine," Mom continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "Sarah needs to hear this. She's 32 years old and still pretending she's some kind of entrepreneur. Honey," she turned to me directly, "stop pretending you have money. We all know you're broke. It's time to face reality and get a job at Target or something. At least that would pay the bills." The room was dead silent now. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped my purse in my lap. This was exactly why I rarely came to family events anymore. Every gathering turned into a referendum on my life choices, my failures, my inability to live up to their expectations. "Sarah, maybe you should consider," Aunt Patricia started to chime in. That's when my phone rang. The ringtone cut through the awkward silence like a knife. I glanced at the screen and saw it was Marcus, my assistant. I told him not to call unless it was urgent, but given the timing, I was actually grateful for the interruption. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. "I should take this." "Oh, let me guess," Mom said with a sarcastic smile. "Another big business opportunity? Maybe someone wants to pay you in exposure again." A few women giggled. I felt my cheeks burn hotter. I answered the call, intending to step outside, but Marcus's voice was excited and loud enough that I could barely hear him over the noise in the room. "Sarah, thank God you answered. I have incredible news. The merger is complete." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "Marcus, I'm at a family event. Can this wait?" "No, you don't understand. The Pinnacle Technologies merger went through ahead of schedule. The board just approved everything. We officially acquired them an hour ago." My heart started racing. We'd been working on this deal for 8 months, and I'd honestly expected it to fall through like so many others had. The fact that it actually went through was, well, it was life-changing. "Are you serious?" I whispered into the phone. "Dead serious. The $2.8 billion merger is complete. Phoenix Digital Solutions now officially owns Pinnacle Technologies and all their subsidiaries. Sir, you did it. You're now the CEO of a $4.2 billion company." The words hit me like a physical blow. $4.2 billion. I'd known the numbers, of course, but hearing them spoken out loud made it real in a way that spreadsheets never could. Mom was still talking to the other women, probably sharing more embarrassing stories about my supposed failures, when I made a decision that would change everything. "Marcus," I said, loud enough for my voice to carry across the room. "Can you repeat that? I want to make sure I heard you correctly." "Of course. The Pinnacle Technologies merger is complete. Phoenix Digital Solutions, your company, just acquired them for $2.8 billion. With our existing assets, that brings the total company valuation to $4.2 billion. You're officially a billionaire, Sarah." Instead of hanging up, I did something that 3 years ago would have terrified me. I hit the speaker button. Marcus's voice suddenly filled the entire room, crystal clear and impossible to ignore. "The legal team is finishing up the paperwork now, but it's official. Forbes is already calling about the interview for next week's cover story. Something about the quiet billionaire who built her empire in secret. And Sarah, the board wants to know if you're ready to announce the IPO plans for Phoenix Digital Solutions. With these numbers, we're looking at potentially the largest tech IPO in the last 5 years." The room had gone completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every wine glass paused halfway to lips. Every eye was locked on me and my phone. That's wonderful news, Marcus," I managed to say, my voice somehow steadier than I felt. "What about the Hartwell acquisition we discussed?" "Already in motion. With Pinnacle's assets, we have the liquidity to move forward immediately. That'll add another $800 million to the portfolio. Oh, and the New York Times wants to do a feature on your data center expansion. Apparently, owning 40% of the cloud storage infrastructure on the West Coast is newsworthy." Emma's gift, the expensive baby carrier, slipped from her hands and landed on the floor with a soft thud. "Sarah," Marcus continued through the speaker, oblivious to the audience he now had, "I know you wanted to keep things quiet, but with numbers like these, it's going to be impossible to stay under the radar much longer. Phoenix Digital Solutions is now the third largest privately held tech company in the country. The Wall Street Journal is already sniffing around." Mom's wine glass had frozen halfway to her mouth. Her face had gone completely pale. "Also," Marcus added, "the building acquisition in downtown went through. You now officially own the Morrison Tower. Your family's law firm, Patterson and Associates, right? They rent the entire 15th floor from you now." Small world. That was Emma's husband's firm. The same firm that had been struggling to make rent payments for the last 6 months, according to Emma's worried conversations with Mom. I caught Emma's eye across the room. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Thank you, Marcus. We'll discuss the details tomorrow. Oh, and make sure the legal team knows about the charitable foundation. I want $500 million allocated for the education initiative we discussed." "Already done. The Sarah Chin Education Foundation will be announced next week alongside the Forbes interview. Is there anything else you need today?" I looked around the room at 30 women staring at me in complete shock. Mom was still frozen with her wine glass suspended in midair, her mouth hanging slightly open. No, I think that covers everything for now. Enjoy your weekend. You do, boss. And congratulations again. You've earned this. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my purse. The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. Emma was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, did he just say? $4.2 billion, I confirmed quietly. That's the current valuation, yes. Mom's wine glass finally completed its journey to her mouth, but her hand was shaking so badly that wine spilled down the front of her dress. She didn't seem to notice. Phoenix Digital Solutions, Aunt Patricia said slowly. I've heard that name in the news. They've been buying up tech companies left and right. That's your company? I nodded. I started it 6 years ago. We began with cloud storage solutions for small businesses and expanded from there. The data centers, the software development, the AI research division, it all grew organically. But Mom finally found her voice, though it came out as a croak. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. You shop at thrift stores. I live modestly because I believe in investing profits back into the company and charitable causes rather than personal luxury, I explained. The apartment is actually just a crash pad I keep for late nights at the office. My primary residence is in Palo Alto. Palo Alto? Emma whispered. That's where all the tech billionaires live. Some of them, yes. Though I spend most of my time at the corporate headquarters. We have offices in 12 cities now. The woman sitting next to Mom, I think her name was Rebecca, leaned forward with wide eyes. When he said you own 40% of the cloud storage on the West Coast, what does that mean exactly? It means that most of the websites you visit, the apps on your phone, the streaming services you use, they're all running on infrastructure that Phoenix Digital Solutions owns and operates. We provide the backbone that keeps the digital world functioning. I could see the wheels turning in their heads as they tried to process this information. The woman they'd been pitying for being broke was apparently one of the wealthiest people in the country. Mom set her wine glass down with trembling hands. Sarah, I don't understand. If you have all this money, all this success, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? Think what? That I was a failure. I kept my voice calm, but I could feel years of built-up frustration threatening to spill over. Mom, every time I tried to talk about my work, you dismissed it as playing with computers. When I mentioned starting a business, you told me to get serious and find a real job. When I tried to explain what I was building, you said I was living in a fantasy world. The room was still dead silent, but I could feel the energy shifting. These women who had been looking at me with pity were now looking at me with something else entirely. Oh, fear, respect. I stopped trying to explain because you'd already decided I was a disappointment, I continued. It was easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe than to constantly defend myself. Emma had picked up the key necklace from its box and was staring at it with new understanding. Sarah, what is this key really for? I smiled at her, the first genuine smile I'd felt all day. It's the key to the trust fund I set up for your baby. $2 million for education with additional funds available for any special needs or opportunities that arise. The key is symbolic. It opens the door to your child's future. Emma's eyes filled with tears. $2 million? Sarah, that's more than David makes in 5 years. Your baby is my niece or nephew. Family takes care of family. I could see Mom trying to process everything, her face cycling through emotions. Shock, confusion, guilt, and something that might have been pride. But why didn't you help us? She asked finally. If you have all this money, why didn't you help when your father was sick? Why didn't you help when we were struggling with the medical bills? This was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one I'd been preparing for. I did help, I said quietly. Who do you think paid for Dad's experimental treatment in Switzerland? The one that insurance wouldn't cover? That was $400,000, by the way. Mom's face went white. But the anonymous donor. That was me. And the mortgage payments when you were behind last year? Also me. The money that mysteriously appeared in your account when the furnace broke? Me again. The scholarship that covered Emma's law school debt? That foundation was funded entirely by Phoenix Digital Solutions. I pulled out my phone and showed them a banking app with transaction records going back 3 years. Payment after payment to various family members, medical bills, mortgage companies, schools. All carefully structured to look like they came from other sources. I've been taking care of this family for years. I said. I just did it quietly because I knew that if you found out it was me, you'd either reject the help out of pride or start expecting handouts instead of appreciating gifts. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, one of the women I didn't recognize spoke up. So when you said this key was for new beginnings, I meant it literally. Emma's child will never have to worry about college tuition, medical bills, or any of the financial stresses that held our generation back. That key opens the door to unlimited possibilities. Emma was crying now, clutching the key to her chest. Sarah, I'm so sorry. We've been so horrible to you. You weren't horrible. You were just uninformed. Mom stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. For a moment I thought she might leave, but instead she walked over to where I was sitting. Sarah, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I owe you an apology. We all do. I've been treating you like a child who couldn't take care of herself, when all along you've been taking care of all of us. She sat down next to me, something she hadn't done at a family gathering in years. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm proud of the woman you've become. The words I'd been waiting to hear my entire adult life, finally spoken in a room full of witnesses. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out a set of documents I'd been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Mom, you know how you've been worried about retirement? About whether you'll be able to afford to stay in the house. She nodded, fresh tears starting to form. Phoenix Digital Solutions just purchased a portfolio of residential properties for executive housing. Your house was included in that purchase. Consider it an early retirement gift. No more mortgage, no more property taxes, no more worrying about maintenance costs. You own it free and clear. Mom broke down completely then, tears streaming down her face as she pulled me into a hug for the first time in years. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Yes, you do. You're my mother. Despite everything, despite the criticism and the doubt, you raised me. You taught me to work hard and persevere. Those lessons are the foundation of everything I've built. As I sat there in my sister's living room, surrounded by women who now looked at me with newfound respect, I realized something important. All those years of being dismissed and underestimated hadn't been wasted. They had taught me humility, drive, and the value of letting my work speak for itself. The baby shower continued, but the dynamic had completely shifted. Instead of pitying glances, I received genuine questions about my business, my plans, my vision for the future. Women who had been strangers an hour ago were now asking for my card, wanting to connect, to learn. Emma pulled me aside as the party was winding down. Sarah, I need to ask you something, she said quietly. Why today? Why did you choose to reveal everything at my baby shower? I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, I didn't plan it. But when Marcus called with the news about the merger and when Mom was, when she said what she said about me pretending to have money, I realized I was tired of pretending to be less than I am. Your baby is going to grow up in a world where anything is possible. I want them to know their aunt as someone who reached for those possibilities, not someone who hid from them. Emma hugged me tightly. This baby is so lucky to have you as an aunt. As I drove home that evening, in my 10-year-old Honda because I genuinely loved that car, I reflected on how much had changed in a single afternoon. The family dynamics that had been set in stone for years had been completely rewritten. The woman they'd seen as the failure was now the success story they'd brag about to their friends. But more importantly, I'd learned something about myself. I didn't need their validation to know my worth, but having it felt better than I'd expected. For the first time in years, I was actually looking forward to the next family gathering. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Thank you for everything. The baby's middle name is going to be Sarah. I smiled as I pulled into my modest apartment complex. Tomorrow I'd go back to being the quiet billionaire who preferred anonymity to attention. But tonight I was just Sarah, the daughter, sister, and soon-to-be aunt who had finally found her place in the family story. The key to new beginnings indeed.